The scent of lemon oil and ancient wood was Henry Clark's sanctuary, a fragrant armor against the world outside his workshop. Here, in the converted carriage house, time was measured not by the relentless ticking of a clock, but by the patient rasp of a hand plane against a plank of curly maple, the slow curing of varnish on a violin's belly. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty, multi-paned windows, illuminating a universe of his own making. Shavings of cherry and walnut curled like fallen leaves on the wide plank floor, and the air was thick with the honest perfume of labor. He ran a calloused thumb over the neck of a guitar he was restoring, feeling the subtle imperfections in the lacquer, the history of the hands that had played it before. This was real. This was tangible. Unlike the life being lived just 100 feet away in the main house, a life that felt increasingly like a performance. He could hear the faint melodic chime of crystal glasses, and the high, brittle laughter of guests he wasn't meant to meet. It was a sound that didn't belong here, an alien frequency intruding upon the quiet dignity of his work, a prelude to a storm he had long felt gathering on the horizon. The house itself, a grand Tudor in the heart of Forest Hills, was as much a part of him as the sawdust under his fingernails. He knew the groan of every floorboard, the precise way the morning light caught in the leaded glass of the dining room windows, the cool, solid feel of the slate roof tiles he'd replaced himself one by one. To him, it was a living thing, a repository of quiet moments and unspoken promises. But to his wife, Clarice, and her mother, Eleanor, it was merely an asset, and a frustratingly illiquid one at that. He could almost hear their conversations, whispered over brunch on the Upper East Side, the words dripping with a casual disdain that always left a bitter taste in his mouth. A starter home, Eleanor would call it, her voice a silken blade. So much potential, if only it were a condo on Park Avenue. They saw the house not as a home, but as a stepping stone, a financial instrument to be leveraged for a more socially acceptable address. They saw his workshop not as a place of craft and passion, but as a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. They saw him, he was beginning to realize, in much the same way, a temporary fixture, a part of their past that was becoming inconvenient for their future. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. Today, the dissonance was a physical pressure in his chest. The garden party. Eleanor had been planning it for weeks. A meticulously curated guest list of people whose names appeared in society columns, not in the local paper. It was, she had explained with a chilling lack of subtlety, an opportunity for Clarice to network. Henry knew what that meant. He'd seen the way Alistair Montgomery, a venture capitalist with a predatory smile and a watch that cost more than Henry's entire workshop, looked at his wife. He was an upgrade, a term Eleanor had used once, thinking he was out of earshot. Henry had been given his instructions with the cool efficiency of a butler being dismissed for the evening. Stay in the workshop. His presence, with his work-worn hands and simple clothes, would be unseemly. He wasn't angry, not anymore. The anger had long ago cooled into a heavy, resigned sadness, a quiet grief for a marriage that had become a business transaction in which he was the undervalued stock. He picked up a piece of sandpaper, the grit a familiar comfort, and tried to focus on the smooth, flowing grain of the wood, but the carefully constructed piece of his sanctuary had already been irrevocably breached. The heavy oak door of the workshop creaked open, not with the familiar shuffle of Clarice coming to see his work, but with a sharp, imperious swing that sent a shiver of dread down Henry's spine. Eleanor Vance stood silhouetted against the bright green of the manicured lawn, a figure of sharp angles and expensive fabric. She wore a Chanel suit the color of cream, and the scent of her perfume, a cloying floral assault, bulldozed the delicate aroma of wood and oil. It was the smell of money, of entitlement, a scent designed to announce its own arrival and dominate any space it entered. Her eyes, the same cool gray as her daughter's, swept over the workshop with a look of profound distaste, lingering for a moment on the neat rows of hand tools, as if they were surgical instruments for a gruesome procedure. She didn't step fully inside, but hovered on the threshold, one patent leather heel planted firmly on the worn stone step, as if afraid the very air of his world might soil her. The carefully orchestrated sounds of the party, the string quartet, the laughter, seemed to fade, replaced by the deafening silence of this new, unwelcome intrusion. "Henry," she said, and his name in her mouth was not an address, but an accusation. "I thought we had an understanding." Her voice was low, but it carried the sharp crack of a whip. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, a voice that had shaped her daughter's life and was now attempting to chisel away at his. He didn't turn around immediately, instead placing the guitar he was holding carefully back onto its velvet-lined stand. He took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing in the familiar, grounding scent of his own world before he had to face hers. He could feel her stare on his back, a physical weight of judgment and impatience. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. It had been building for years, in every condescending comment about his profession, every passive-aggressive remark about their quaint neighborhood, every time she had looked at him as if he were a piece of furniture that had come with the house, one she was eager to replace. He finally turned, his hands loose at his sides, his expression calm, a placid lake over a deep, cold reservoir of resolve. "Clarice has important people here," Eleanor continued, her chin lifted to a regal angle. The words were clipped, precise, each one a perfectly sharpened dart aimed at his pride. "Your presence is unseemly." The word hung in the air between them, thick and ugly. Unseemly, as if he were a stain on the pristine canvas of their social ambitions. She took a half step forward, her gaze flicking towards the driveway. "Go for a drive. Go to a movie. Come back when everyone has left." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, a royal decree from the queen of this carefully constructed kingdom. He could see the party unfolding behind her on the lawn, a tableau of pastel dresses and crisp white shirts. He saw Clarice standing near a fountain, laughing at something Alistair Montgomery was saying, her head tilted back in a way that used to be reserved for him. In that moment, the last vestiges of his hope for their marriage crumbled into dust. It wasn't just that he was being excluded. He was being erased, scrubbed from the picture so a better one could be painted in its place. Henry's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, but it held the unyielding strength of old-growth oak. No. It was a single word, a small, solid stone dropped into the churning waters of her entitlement. He watched the word land, saw the ripple of disbelief and then fury cross her perfectly made-up face. Her eyes narrowed, the gray hardening to the color of storm clouds. She was not used to this word. From him, from anyone. In her world, wealth and social standing were levers that moved people, and he was supposed to be easily moved. He stayed perfectly still, rooted to the floor of his workshop, his feet planted in the world he had built, a world of substance and skill. He was not a handyman to be dismissed. He was not a temporary inconvenience. This was his home. This was his land. The realization that she had never, not for 1 second, seen it that way was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass in his heart. The air in the small space grew thick, charged with the unspoken war between his quiet dignity and her venomous ambition. "I beg your pardon?" Eleanor's voice was a barely controlled hiss. The mask of polite society had slipped, revealing the raw, grasping ambition beneath. "This is not a negotiation. Clarice's future is being decided out there on that lawn, and you will not be the one to ruin it with your presence." She gestured vaguely with a dismissive flick of her wrist, a gesture that encompassed not just him, but his entire life's work, everything he was. He could see the frantic calculations behind her eyes, the fury that he, the simple furniture restorer, the man who was supposed to be grateful for his beautiful, well-bred wife, would dare to defy her. He saw her glance back towards the party, a flicker of panic in her eyes. The guests, her precious social chess pieces, might notice this little drama at the edge of the property. The thought of public embarrassment was, to Eleanor, a fate worse than death. It was the one currency she truly valued, and he was threatening to devalue it simply by existing in his own space. He simply shook his head again, a slow, deliberate movement. "Eleanor, I'm not leaving my property." He let the words settle, emphasizing the last two. My property. It was a fact, a simple, legal truth. But in that moment, it felt like a declaration of war. He saw the flash of confusion, then contempt in her eyes. She saw it as a pathetic, powerless bluff. To her, ownership was about control, about appearances. She and Clarice lived in the house. They hosted the parties. They were the face of the home. He was just the man in the background who fixed things. The idea that he held any real power, any actual claim, was so foreign to her worldview that it was almost laughable. But he wasn't laughing. He was watching the woman who had systematically dismantled his marriage, who had encouraged his wife to see him as less than, and he felt a profound, chilling calm settle over him. The time for quiet resentment was over. The time for polite accommodation had passed. Eleanor's face, a carefully constructed mask of expensive moisturizers and subtle cosmetics, began to crumble. A splotchy red rash crept up her neck, a telltale sign of her rage. "Your property!" she spat, the words dripping with venom. "This house is the only thing of value you have ever been associated with, and you have it because of my daughter. Do not for 1 second forget that." It was the core of her belief system, the foundational lie upon which she had built her entire strategy. Clarice had married down, a temporary inconvenience to get a foothold in the New York real estate market. He was the foothold, and now the foothold was refusing to be stepped on. He saw her mind working, her gaze darting around the workshop as if seeking a weapon. Her eyes landed on his phone, sitting on the workbench. Then, a slow, malicious smile spread across her lips. It was a terrifying transformation, the polite socialite dissolving to reveal the predator beneath. She was cornered, and she was about to do something reckless, something irreversible. With a theatrical flourish of manufactured panic, Eleanor pulled her own phone from her small, ridiculously expensive handbag. It was a pearl-white device, a stark, sterile object in the organic warmth of his workshop. Her fingers, tipped with blood-red nails, flew across the screen. He knew what she was doing before she even lifted the phone to her ear. It was an act of such profound, calculated malice that it took his breath away. It was one thing to belittle him in private, to dismiss his life's work, to try and push him out of his own home for an afternoon. It was another thing entirely to invoke the full, terrifying power of the law based on a deliberate, venomous lie. This was not about embarrassment anymore. This was about destruction. She was willing to burn everything to the ground, to have him arrested, to create a public spectacle of the highest order, all to remove a minor obstacle from her path to social triumph. And in that moment, he knew his marriage wasn't just broken. It had been a sham from the very beginning. "Yes, hello?" Her voice was a masterpiece of contrived fear, trembling and cracking in all the right places. "I need to report a trespasser." Henry felt the word like a physical blow. Trespasser, in his own home. On the land his grandmother had walked, in the workshop where he had poured his soul into his craft for over a decade. He watched, frozen in a state of surreal disbelief, as she spun her fiction. He's a handyman. Yes, a disgruntled handyman who refuses to leave the property. She turned her back to him slightly, angling her body towards the main house, ensuring her performance was visible to anyone who might be watching. "I'm afraid he's becoming aggressive. My daughter and I, we don't feel safe." The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it was almost impressive. She was painting him as a threat, a dangerous unknown, a blue-collar menace invading their pristine world of wealth and privilege. He looked past her, through the open door, and his eyes found Clarice. She was standing on the patio, champagne flute still in her hand, watching the entire exchange, her face a pale, unreadable mask. She saw it all, and she was doing nothing. The silence that fell after she ended the call was heavier than any sound. It was a vacuum, filled only by the distant, mocking melody of the string quartet and the frantic beating of Henry's own heart. Eleanor stood with her back to him, her shoulders heaving with feigned sobs, a perfect portrait of a victim. But Henry saw her for what she was, a black hole of ambition, consuming everything and everyone around her to feed her insatiable ego. He looked again towards the patio, a desperate, final plea in his gaze. He willed Clarice to move, to speak, to walk over, and put an end to this madness. He saw her take a half-step forward, her mouth opening slightly. But then she caught her mother's eye. Eleanor gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, and Clarice froze. She lowered her gaze, took a sip of her champagne, and turned back to Alastair Montgomery, a silent, devastating act of complicity. That single, cowardly movement was more painful than Eleanor's shouted insults, more damaging than the lie she had just told the police. It was the final, definitive betrayal. The wait was an eternity compressed into minutes. Henry didn't move. He remained a statue in the center of his workshop, the scent of lemon oil and sawdust now mingling with the acrid smell of betrayal. He could hear the party guests beginning to murmur, their curiosity piqued by the drama unfolding at the edge of the lawn. He felt their eyes on him, 100 invisible needles pricking his skin. He was no longer a person, he was a spectacle, the day's entertainment. Eleanor maintained her position at the doorway, a sentinel of her own lies, occasionally dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. She was playing her part to perfection. He wondered what was going through her mind, if there was any flicker of doubt, any ounce of humanity left. But looking at the rigid set of her shoulders, the triumphant cruel curve of her lips that she thought he couldn't see, he knew there was none. She was reveling in this, in her own power to create chaos, to manipulate reality to her will. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the genteel music of the string quartet like a surgeon's scalpel, the distant, rising wail of a siren. It grew steadily louder, a mournful, urgent cry that announced the arrival of a world far removed from garden parties and venture capitalists. The sound seemed to suck the air from the manicured lawn. The chatter of the guests died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. Heads turned, craning to see the source of the commotion. Henry watched as the flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across the leaves of the old oak tree at the end of the driveway. A frantic, strobing heartbeat. This was real now. This was not a family squabble or a social maneuver. This was a 911 call. This was an official report. This was a line that had been crossed, a bell that could not be unrung. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that nothing would ever be the same again. Two NYPD cruisers pulled into the long, crushed stone driveway, their tires making a soft, ominous crunch. They didn't use their sirens to enter, but the flashing lights continued their silent, rhythmic sweep across the front of the magnificent Tudor house, turning the festive scene into something stark and serious. The party guests parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of shock, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled delight. A public humiliation was, after all, the most thrilling spectator sport of the Upper East Side. Two officers stepped out of the first car, their movements economical and professional. They were big men, their dark blue uniforms and heavy utility belts a stark working-class contrast to the linen suits and silk dresses of the onlookers. Their faces were impassive, trained to observe, not to judge, but Henry could see in their eyes a weary familiarity with this kind of call. The messy, unpredictable terrain of domestic disputes. Eleanor immediately sprang into action, rushing towards the officers with the practiced desperation of a seasoned actress. "Oh, thank God you're here, officers," she cried, her voice trembling. "That man," she pointed a shaking finger towards the workshop. "He's a handyman we had to let go. He's refused to leave the premises. He was becoming agitated. We were frightened for our safety." She delivered the lines with breathtaking conviction, her hand pressed to her chest. One officer, the older of the two, with a salt and pepper mustache and tired eyes, nodded slowly, his gaze shifting from Eleanor to Henry, who still stood calmly just inside the workshop door. He didn't look aggressive. He didn't look disgruntled. He just looked still. The officer's eyes took in the scene, the lavish party, the hysterical wealthy woman, the quiet man in the work clothes, and a flicker of something unreadable passed over his face. He had seen this play before, in many different settings, and he knew the script was often not what it seemed. The officer's partner, younger and more by the book, approached Henry cautiously. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the building and keep your hands where I can see them." The voice was firm, but not accusatory. It was procedure. Henry complied without a word. He stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the sudden brightness making him blink. He felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, judging him, condemning him based on the performance they had just witnessed. He could feel the heat of shame rising in his cheeks, a flush of humiliation so intense it was almost dizzying. This was Eleanor's victory. She had successfully painted him as the villain in his own story, on his own land. He saw Clarice watching from the steps of the patio, her face ashen. Her eyes met his for a brief, agonizing moment, and in them, he saw not malice, but a pathetic, hollowed-out fear. She was a ghost at her own party, a puppet whose strings were held by the woman now giving a tearful statement to the police. "Sir, what's your name?" the older officer asked, his voice a low rumble. "Henry Clark," he replied, his own voice sounding distant, detached. "And what is your relationship to the complainant?" Henry's gaze drifted from the officer to Eleanor, then to the house, his house, standing silent and majestic behind the flashing lights. For a moment, he felt a surge of white-hot rage, a primal urge to scream the truth, to expose the whole rotten charade for what it was, but he choked it down. Rage was what Eleanor wanted. It would validate her story, prove her point. Aggression would make him the aggressor. Instead, he let a cold, clear purpose settle over him, a focus as sharp and precise as the edge of one of his chisels. He had one move to make, one card to play. It was a card he had never wanted to use. a truth he had kept hidden in the hopes of being loved for who he was, not for what he had. That hope was now dead. He looked the officer directly in the eye. "She is my mother-in-law," he said, his voice steady. "And this is my house." The officer's expression didn't change, but a subtle tension entered his shoulders. He'd heard it all before. Ownership disputes. He said-she said battles. "Do you have any proof of residency, Mr. Clark? A driver's license? A utility bill?" Eleanor, overhearing this, let out a small, derisive laugh. "Officer, he gets some mail here, of course. He was a tenant, in the carriage house." The lie was seamless, effortless. She was building a new reality, brick by brick, right in front of him. But Henry wasn't looking at her anymore. His mind was already moving, planning. The years of quiet dignity, of turning the other cheek, of absorbing their condescension, were over. He was about to introduce them to the man they had never bothered to know. "I have something better than a utility bill," Henry said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He turned and looked towards the main house. "It's in my office. If you'll escort me, I can retrieve it." The younger officer tensed, placing a hand on his belt, but the older one gave a slight nod. "I'll go with you, Mr. Clark." As Henry and the officer began to walk towards the front door, a murmur went through the crowd. Eleanor's face tightened. This was not part of her script. She had expected a swift, decisive removal, a clean extraction of the problem. This was something else. This was him taking control of the narrative. He could feel her furious gaze on his back as he walked past the stunned guests, past the string quartet that had fallen silent, and past his wife, who stood frozen on the patio, a beautiful, tragic statue of her own indecision. The house was cool and quiet inside, a stark contrast to the drama unfolding on the lawn. The familiar scent of beeswax and old paper calmed him, a balm to his frayed nerves. The officer followed him silently, his heavy boots making no sound on the thick Persian runner in the hallway. Henry led him to his office, a small book-lined room off the main foyer. It was his other sanctuary, a place of order and quiet contemplation. He walked directly to the large, antique mahogany desk, a piece he had restored himself, and opened the bottom drawer. He reached past old receipts and tax documents, his fingers searching for the familiar, cool, supple texture of the leather folio. He found it, its weight in his hand both a burden and a relief. It contained the secret he had guarded for so long, the truth of his identity that he had deliberately hidden, hoping it would never be necessary. He pulled the folio out and placed it on the desk, the rich, dark leather gleaming in the dim light. He unfastened the brass clasp, the small click echoing in the silent room. Inside, nestled in protective plastic sleeves, were the documents that defined his life in a way his woodworking never could. He felt a pang of regret. He had despised the idea of this wealth defining him, of it being the most interesting thing about him. He had wanted to build a life on his own terms, with his own hands. But Eleanor and Clarice had left him no choice. They had judged him by their own shallow, materialistic standards, and so he would be forced to answer them in the only language they truly understood: the cold, irrefutable language of money and power. With the officer watching, he carefully removed 2 documents. The first was his passport for identification. The second was a thick, vellum-like paper, covered in dense, legalistic text, and bearing an official, embossed seal from the city of New York. It was the irrevocable deed to the property, a document that established, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the sole and exclusive owner of the house at 24 Willow Lane, Forest Hills, Queens, was one Henry Clark. There was no co-signer. There was no mortgage holder. There was no mention of Clarice or anyone else. It was his, free and clear, a gift from a grandmother who had valued privacy and substance over flash and performance. He held in his hand the legal proof of the world they had tried to deny. He handed the documents to the officer, who took them with a professional air. The officer's eyes scanned the passport first, then moved to the deed. Henry watched his face, saw the subtle widening of his eyes as he read the legal description, the name of the grantee, the date of transfer. He saw the officer's gaze lift from the paper and look around the room, at the expensive art on the walls, the antique furniture, seeing it all in a new light. This wasn't the office of a disgruntled handyman. This was the office of the man who owned it all. The officer looked back at the deed, then at Henry, and a new understanding dawned in his expression. The entire dynamic of the situation had just been turned on its head. The simple domestic disturbance had just become something far more complex. Henry then took out his phone, a simple, functional device, and made a single, short call. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke in the same calm, measured tone he used when discussing the fine points of a dovetail joint. "Arthur, it's Henry Clark," he said. "Initiate divorce proceedings. Immediately. Full enforcement of all premarital assets." There was a pause. "And file an immediate restraining order against Eleanor Vance for harassment." He ended the call without saying goodbye. Each word had been a hammer blow, precise and final, demolishing the life he had known. The officer stared at him, the deed still in his hand, a silent witness to the swift, brutal execution. The quiet craftsman had finally revealed the steel beneath the surface. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. They walked back outside, emerging from the cool darkness of the house into the garish theater of the lawn. All eyes turned to them. Eleanor, who had been regaling the younger officer with more tales of Henry's supposed instability, fell silent, a look of triumphant expectation on her face. The older officer walked directly towards her, his face an unreadable mask of professional neutrality. He held the deed in his hand. "Ma'am," he began, his voice flat and devoid of any sympathy. "According to this irrevocable deed, registered with the city on October 17, 2012, Mr. Henry Clark is the sole and exclusive owner of this property." A collective gasp went through the crowd of guests. Eleanor's jaw went slack, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly looking garish and clown-like. Her mind visibly struggled to process the information, the words not computing with the reality she had so carefully constructed. That's impossible," she sputtered, her voice losing its theatrical tremor and gaining a sharp, panicked edge. "It's a mistake, a forgery." But the officer's face was implacable. "This is a certified document from the city registrar, ma'am. It's as real as it gets." He then turned his head slightly, his voice rising just enough for everyone on the lawn to hear clearly. "Which means, according to the law, you are the one creating a disturbance on Mr. Clark's private property." The public humiliation was a palpable thing, a wave of heat that washed over the lawn. The socialites stared, their expressions a delicious mix of horror and schadenfreude. This was better than gossip. This was a live execution of a social queen. Clarice, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally rushed forward, tears now streaming down her pale face. "Henry, what is this?" she cried, her hand reaching for his arm. "What's going on? We can talk about this." Henry didn't even look at her. He pulled his arm away from her touch as if he'd been burned. His gaze was fixed on the officer, his voice clear and carrying, a public proclamation for all to hear. "Officer, I don't wish to press charges against Ms. Vance for filing a false police report." A small, magnanimous gesture that only highlighted her pathetic criminal act. "I just want you to escort her off my property." He paused, then delivered the final devastating blow. His eyes, the chill of the pre-war Tudor home, was a constant, a deep, architectural cold that no amount of forced air from the modern HVAC system could ever truly banish. It seeped from the thick plaster walls and the dark, heavy oak beams that crisscrossed the ceiling, a silent testament to a grandeur that felt both inherited and unearned. Henry Clark felt it in his bones as the first insistent chirps of his alarm clock sliced through the dawn's silence. The sound was thin and digital, an alien intrusion in the cavernous master bedroom that Clarice had decorated with the help of a minimalist designer. The color palette was a sterile gradient of grays and off-whites, a landscape of quiet, expensive taste that offered no warmth, no comfort. He slid out from under the duvet, the high thread count Egyptian cotton feeling slick and foreign against his skin, a luxury he never would have chosen for himself. He moved with a practiced quiet, his bare feet making no sound on the antique Persian rug. Clarice remained asleep, a perfect sculpture under the sheets, her breathing shallow and even. The faint, cloying scent of her jasmine and sandalwood night cream hung in the air, a fragrant wall between them, even in slumber. He navigated the obstacle course of her discarded silk robe and Italian leather slippers, his destination a walk-in closet larger than his first apartment. He bypassed her side, a meticulously organized universe of designer labels and color-coded cashmere, and went to his own small relegated section. There, hanging on a simple wooden hanger, was his work coat. It was an old canvas barn coat, its olive drab faded to a soft, mossy green, the leather collar cracked and softened with age. It smelled of linseed oil, cherry wood shavings, and the faint, metallic tang of his sharpening stones. It was the smell of his life, of his hands, of his purpose. As his fingers brushed against the familiar, rough texture of the fabric, a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere made him pause. The even rhythm of his wife's breathing had stopped, replaced by a silence that was anything but peaceful. He didn't need to turn to know she was awake, her cool gray eyes fixed on him, on the coat in his hands. "Henry, for God's sake, not that thing again." Her voice, still thick with sleep, was sharp and serrated, cutting through the morning stillness with the casual cruelty that had become her native tongue. He slowly turned to face her. She was propped up on one elbow, her blonde hair falling perfectly across a silk pillowcase, her face a mask of weary disgust. Her gaze wasn't on him, but on the coat, as if it were a piece of roadkill he had dragged into her pristine sanctuary. "We've talked about this," she continued, swinging her legs out of bed, the silk of her nightgown whispering against her skin. "It's filthy. It makes the entire entryway smell like sawdust." The way she said the word, as if it were a foul curse, made something tighten in Henry's chest. It was a familiar sensation, a dull ache he had learned to live with, the constant, low-grade pain of being fundamentally misunderstood by the person who was supposed to know him best. He looked down at the coat, at the faint stains of varnish and the small, neatly stitched patch on the elbow he'd repaired himself. To him, these were not signs of filth, but badges of honor, a map of his days, a testament to a life spent creating and restoring beauty. To her, they were simply evidence of a life she was increasingly ashamed of. "My mother is coming over for brunch," she said, her voice taking on a harder, more practical edge. "She'll have a fit if she sees that hanging by the door." It was always about her mother, Eleanor, the ghost who haunted every decorating choice, every social engagement, every quiet judgment that passed between them. He felt the familiar urge to defend himself, to explain the coat's history, its comfort, its meaning, but he knew it was pointless. Arguing with Clarice was like trying to plant a garden in solid stone. With a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of his entire marriage, he placed the coat back in the closet, the small act feeling like a surrender. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. Her eyes, having won the battle of the coat, immediately scanned him for other infractions. Her gaze as thorough and unforgiving as a customs inspector's. They landed on the canvas backpack slouched by the closet door. It was a simple, military-style bag he'd owned for 20 years, its sturdy fabric softened and faded from countless trips, its leather straps worn to a comfortable patina. Inside were his sketchbooks, a few well-worn paperbacks, and the thermos of coffee he prepared for himself each morning. To Clarice, however, it was another source of profound social embarrassment. "And that," she said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger, "is not leaving this room. It looks like something a college student would carry, or worse." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Or someone poor. He didn't need her to say it. He saw it in the curl of her lip, in the condescending pity in her eyes. She gestured towards a sleek black leather messenger bag sitting on a velvet bench. "I bought you that for your birthday 2 years ago. It's Bottega Veneta. Use it." It was a beautiful bag, impossibly expensive and utterly devoid of character. It had no history, no soul. It was a prop, an accessory for the man she wanted him to be, not the man he was. Before he could even respond, her critical gaze moved downward to his wrist. He was fastening the worn leather strap of his grandfather's watch. A simple, elegant timepiece from the 1950s, with a slightly scratched crystal and a quiet, steady tick that he found deeply comforting. "And the watch, Henry. Honestly, it's ancient. Alistair was showing me his new Patek Philippe the other day, and you're still wearing that thing." The name dropped so casually, Alistair Montgomery, the venture capitalist with the predatory smile, sent a fresh wave of coldness through him. He felt like an exhibit being prepared for a viewing, every authentic piece of himself being stripped away and replaced with a more acceptable, expensive replica. The quiet dignity of his morning routine had been transformed into a ritual of humiliation, a systematic erasure of his own identity, piece by painful piece. Clarice finally seemed satisfied that he had been sufficiently sanitized for the day ahead. She turned her attention to the vanity table, a vast expanse of white marble covered in an army of expensive jars and bottles. As she began her own meticulous morning ritual, she spoke to his reflection in the mirror, her tone shifting from command to casual briefing, as if he were an employee receiving his daily instructions. "Mother is planning the garden party for this afternoon. The caterers will be here at noon, the florist at 1. I need you to make sure the carriage house doors are closed. The guests don't need to see all that clutter. The word hung in the air, another small, sharp dart. His workshop, his sanctuary of craft and precision, was just clutter. He felt a slow, cold anger begin to uncoil in the pit of his stomach, an emotion he had suppressed for so long he had almost forgotten its texture. He realized the new jacket she had insisted he wear, the soulless leather bag, the pressure to discard his grandfather's watch. It wasn't just about her mother's brunch visit. It was a dress rehearsal. It was about preparing him, or rather, preparing to hide him, for the main event. The garden party was not a celebration. It was an operation, a carefully staged piece of social theater, and he was being written out of the script. He watched her in the mirror as she expertly applied a serum that cost more than his favorite hand plane. She was a stranger to him now, a beautiful, polished stranger who saw his life's passion as an unsightly mess and his presence as a liability. The distance between them was no longer just the physical space in their cold, quiet bedroom. It had become a vast, unbridgeable chasm of values, of ambition, of love that had long ago curdled into something transactional and cruel. Alistair is the guest of honor, of course, she continued, her voice light and airy as she blended foundation into her flawless skin. Mother thinks he could be a huge asset for the gallery's new acquisitions fund. His portfolio is extensive. Henry remained silent, a statue of quiet compliance by the closet. He knew exactly what this was. Eleanor Vance did nothing without a strategic objective. The garden party, the guest of honor, the frantic need to erase every trace of Henry's unseemly existence. It was all part of a single, brutal campaign. He was the starter husband, attached to the starter home, and Eleanor was orchestrating an upgrade. The casual mention of Alistair's name was not just a piece of information. It was a warning shot, a declaration of his own impending obsolescence. Clarice finally finished, turning from the mirror to face him directly. Her expression was no longer one of disgust, but of cool, detached instruction. So, the plan is simple. You'll stay in the workshop, all afternoon. Mother says your presence would be a distraction from the caliber of the guests. The word caliber landed like a punch to the gut. It was a judgment on his very being, a final, definitive statement of his worth in their world. He felt the last thread of his patience, a thread he had been carefully tending for years, finally snap. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, the picture of acquiescence. He picked up the sterile messenger bag. He slipped on the generic, expensive watch she had bought him. He walked out of the room without a word, but as he descended the grand staircase, the cold, silent house felt less like a home than a battlefield. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his marrow, that this was the last day he would ever allow them to make him feel like a trespasser in his own life. The hours in his workshop, usually a balm to his soul, became a form of slow torture. The familiar, rhythmic scrape of a card scraper against a slab of tiger maple did little to quiet the storm gathering in his mind. The carefully constructed peace of his sanctuary had been breached, not by Eleanor's physical intrusion, but by the poison of her words, which had seeped into the very air he breathed. Unseemly, caliber, clutter. The words echoed in the vast, empty spaces of his marriage, each one a hammer blow against the foundation of what he thought they had built. Through the grimy, multi-paned windows, he could see the party beginning to take shape on the lawn. A string quartet was setting up near the rose garden, their black and white attire a stark, formal intrusion on the natural landscape. White-jacketed caterers moved with silent efficiency, arranging towers of champagne flutes and platters of food so artfully constructed they looked more like architectural models than sustenance. He watched as Clarice glided among them, a vision in a pastel silk dress, pointing and directing, her smile bright and brittle. She looked like the lady of the manor, a role she played with increasing, terrifying conviction. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a film of his own life, a film in which he had been recast as a minor, off-screen character. He set down his scraper, the silence in the workshop suddenly deafening, amplifying the cheerful alien sounds from the lawn. It was in that silence that he heard it. Voices, carried on the breeze, coming from the stone patio just outside the workshop's side door. It was Clarice and her mother, their voices low but sharp, slicing through the gentle melody of the violins tuning up. He couldn't help but listen, his body frozen, his hand still resting on the smooth, cool wood of his workbench. He heard Eleanor's voice. a venomous whisper. Alistair's lawyers think we can have the entire asset liquidated within 90 days of the filing. The key is to prove his financial contribution was negligible. A wave of ice water washed through Henry's veins. Clarice's reply was barely audible, but it was the final, fatal blow. And the house? Mother, he loves this house. Eleanor's laugh was a short, sharp bark, devoid of all humor. Darling, it's not a home. It's the primary obstacle. And obstacles, like inconvenient husbands, are meant to be removed. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The scent of wood shavings and varnish, once a source of comfort, now felt like the cloying aroma of a funeral parlor. Obstacle. Liquidated. Removed. The words were not just cruel, they were tactical. The cold, precise language of a corporate takeover. This wasn't a marriage falling apart. It was a hostile acquisition, and he was the asset being stripped, the inconvenient CEO being ousted. The chisel he had been holding moments before slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the concrete floor with a sound that seemed to shatter the afternoon. He stared at his hands, at the calluses and faint scars that told the story of his life. A life of patient, honest work. He had always believed in the intrinsic value of that work, in the dignity of creating something real and lasting with his own two hands. But in their world, a world of shell companies and forensic accounting, his life's work was valued at zero. It was negligible. He felt a rage so pure and cold, it was almost serene. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowing insults and accommodating their endless social climbing, coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of resolve. He was no longer a husband trying to save his marriage. He was a man defending his life from predators who saw him as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. They thought he was a simple man, a quaint craftsman, too preoccupied with the grain of wood to understand the complexities of their world. They had underestimated him. They had mistaken his quiet nature for weakness, his patience for stupidity. It was the most profound and final mistake they would ever make. He looked through the window again, at Clarice now laughing with Alistair Montgomery, her hand resting casually on the sleeve of his absurdly expensive suit. He felt no pain, no jealousy, only a chilling, detached clarity. He had to know the full extent of their plan. He had to see the blueprint of their betrayal, not just in overheard whispers, but in black and white. He knew exactly where to find it. He moved with a purpose that bordered on predatory. Every vestige of the wounded, accommodating husband was gone, replaced by a cold, efficient strategist. His first action was to lock the main door of the workshop, a gesture that was both practical and symbolic. He was sealing off his world, his sanctuary, preparing to invade theirs. He then walked to the side door, the one that opened onto the patio where he had just overheard his own execution being planned. He cracked it open a fraction of an inch, his eye pressed to the gap. The coast was clear. Eleanor and Clarice had moved towards the center of the lawn, their attention fully consumed by their glittering guests. The string quartet had begun to play, a light, airy piece by Vivaldi that provided the perfect, ironic soundtrack for his clandestine mission. He slipped out of the workshop, his work boots making no sound on the soft grass at the edge of the flagstone patio. He felt a surge of adrenaline, his senses heightened to an almost painful degree. He could smell the overpowering sweetness of the lilies arranged in massive urns, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with freshly cut grass, the faint, acrid smell of the caterer's chafing dishes. He moved along the side of the house, keeping to the shadows of the ancient, sprawling wisteria vines that clung to the brickwork, his movements as silent and deliberate as a hunter stalking his prey. He reached the French doors leading into the dining room. They were unlocked, as he knew they would be. He slid one open just enough to slip through, the cool, conditioned air of the house washing over him, feeling as sterile and lifeless as a mausoleum. The contrast was jarring. Outside, a world of light, music, and false laughter. Inside, a world of shadows, silence, and cold, hard truths. The grandfather clock in the foyer ticked with the slow, inexorable rhythm of a time bomb, each tick a second closer to detonation. He had to get to her office on the second floor, and he had to do it without being seen by any of the staff. The journey up the grand, curving staircase felt like an ascent into the heart of enemy territory. He placed his feet carefully on the edge of each step, avoiding the center spots he knew were prone to creaking. His knowledge of the house's intimate secrets, now a weapon in his arsenal. The air grew cooler, thinner as he climbed. The walls of the second-floor landing were lined with abstract art Clarice had acquired from her gallery. large canvases of sterile colors and jagged lines that seemed to radiate a cold, intellectual hostility. Her office door was at the end of the hall, a stark white panel against a gray wall. He reached for the doorknob, a ridiculously expensive piece of brushed nickel that was cold to the touch, his palm sweating despite the chill in the air. He paused, listening. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the party below, a distant murmur of a life he was no longer a part of. With a deep, steadying breath, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as he expected, a monument to his wife's ambition and a shrine to her detachment. A white lacquer desk, as vast and empty as an Arctic ice floe, sat in the center of the room. On it rested a single, sleek, silver laptop, closed and silent. There were no family photos, no personal trinkets, none of the warm, comfortable clutter that makes a space a human one. The only decoration was a single, perfect white orchid in a glass vase, its beauty as cold and engineered as everything else in the room. He walked across the plush, sound-dampening white carpet and stood over the desk, his reflection a distorted, shadowy figure on the laptop's polished surface. This was the vault. This was where she kept the plans, the strategies, the cold, hard facts of her betrayal. He reached out and lifted the lid, the small, quiet chime the machine made as it woke up sounding as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. A login screen appeared, a blank blue field with a single blinking cursor, a final barrier between his ignorance and the devastating truth he was about to uncover. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The password. For a terrifying second, his mind went blank. She was meticulous about security, changing her passwords for banking and social media every few months with a ruthless efficiency. But this was different. This was her personal machine, her hub. He thought back, sifting through the years of their shared life, searching for a key, a number, a word that held meaning only for them. And then it came to him, a memory so poignant, it was physically painful. The date he had proposed to her on a windswept beach in Montauk, a day he had considered the beginning of his real life. He remembered the date as clearly as his own birthday, 1104, a simple 4-digit code she had once used for their shared alarm system, a code he had suggested full of a naive, romantic symbolism. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble on the ghost of a sentiment she might have forgotten she ever had. His fingers, clumsy with sweat and adrenaline, hovered over the keyboard. He typed the 4 numbers. The sound of the keys clicking seemed to echo off the bare walls. He hit enter, his eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the inevitable, password incorrect message. But instead, he heard the soft, welcoming chime of the operating system starting up. He opened his eyes. He was in. The desktop was as sterile as the room, a grid of neatly organized folders. His eyes scanned the names, gallery acquisitions, social calendar, household, and then he saw it. A folder that made the air leave his lungs in a single, painful rush. It was labeled simply, Exit Strategy. He double-clicked, and a list of documents filled the screen. There were PDFs from a law firm he'd never heard of, spreadsheets detailing their shared assets, or rather, her assessment of them, and a series of email chains between Clarice and her mother. He clicked on the most recent email. It was from Eleanor. "Darling," it began. "Alistair's forensic accountant found something. It seems our Mr. Clark has been far more discreet than we imagined. It's not a small inheritance. It's a trust. An irrevocable trust fund of a magnitude we simply cannot afford to let him keep." The words on the screen swam before Henry's eyes. The crisp, black letters of the email dissolving into a meaningless blur. Irrevocable trust fund. Magnitude. The clinical, predatory language of the message seemed to suck the very oxygen from the room. He felt a strange, buzzing sensation in his ears. A high-frequency hum that drowned out the distant, cheerful music from the garden party. It was the sound of his life imploding. He gripped the edges of the cold, lacquered desk, his knuckles turning white, anchoring himself to a reality that was rapidly disintegrating. A trust fund. He had never used those words with Clarice. He had told her about a small inheritance from his grandmother, a story that was technically true, but deliberately incomplete. He had wanted to build a life with her based on shared values, on mutual respect for his craft and her ambition, not on the staggering, unearned power of old money. He had wanted to be Henry Clark, the luthier, the man who could bring a forgotten cello back to life, not Henry Clark, the beneficiary of a fortune so vast it was almost an abstraction. And now, that very discretion, that act of love and faith, had been twisted into a weapon against him. They hadn't just been suspicious of his finances, they had hired a forensic accountant. The term itself was a violation, an image of a stranger in a suit meticulously picking through the private, sacred details of his inheritance, a legacy his grandmother had intended to be a shield, not a target. He felt a profound, chilling sense of violation, as if his entire past had been burglarized. They hadn't just stumbled upon his secret, they had hunted it down with the relentless, immoral efficiency of corporate raiders planning a hostile takeover. His marriage, he realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach, hadn't been a partnership. It had been a long, elaborate period of due diligence. With a newfound, icy resolve that pushed the initial shock deep into a cold corner of his soul, Henry's fingers moved over the trackpad, the cursor gliding with a precision that belied the tremor in his hands. He clicked open a spreadsheet file titled Asset Allocation, Preliminary Draft. The grid that filled the screen was a brutal, systematic dissection of their shared life, reduced to a series of columns and calculations. His eyes scanned the rows, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. Henry's premarital assets, the first column read. Listed below were items he cherished, his collection of antique woodworking tools, passed down through 3 generations, the first guitar he ever built, the mahogany desk he was currently sitting at, a piece he had spent 6 months restoring. Next to each item, in the estimated value column, was a number so insultingly low it was laughable. $500, $200, $1,000. They had appraised his life's work, his heritage, as if it were junk from a flea market. In stark contrast, the column for Clarice's premarital assets was filled with inflated figures for her designer wardrobe, her collection of investment handbags, and a portfolio of art from her gallery whose value seemed to increase with every passing month. But it was the final tab at the bottom of the spreadsheet that made the cold rage in his chest solidify into something akin to granite. It was labeled Projected Alimony Scenarios. He clicked on it. There, in cold, hard numbers, was their plan: to leverage his modest, documented income of a furniture restorer to paint him as the financially dependent spouse, making a claim not just on the house, but on a portion of her future earnings from the gallery. They were going to use his own humility, the very life he had chosen, to portray him as a failure, a financial burden they were magnanimously shedding. The audacity of it, the sheer, calculated cruelty, was breathtaking. It was a perfect, self-contained fiction designed for a judge. A narrative so twisted it almost felt like a work of art. His movements became more fluid, more certain. The shock had been replaced by a grim, insatiable need for the complete truth, no matter how ugly. He navigated out of the spreadsheet and into a folder containing PDF documents, the letterhead of a prestigious and notoriously aggressive Manhattan law firm, Goldman, Finch, and Adler, staring up at him like a skull and crossbones. He opened the first file, a draft of a divorce petition. He scanned the dense, legalistic prose, the unfamiliar terms leaping off the page. Irreconcilable differences, it began. A bland, sterile phrase for such a profound and personal demolition. But as he read further, the language became sharper, more specific, more venomous. He saw his name attached to phrases that made his blood run cold. Dissipation of marital assets, referring to the money he spent on rare woods and materials for his workshop. Failure to contribute to the marital standard of living. A direct assault on his choice of profession. Emotional distress. A catch-all accusation designed to paint him as an unstable, difficult partner. It was a character assassination, meticulously crafted by legal experts, designed to strip him not just of his assets, but of his dignity. Every argument they ever had, every disagreement over money, every moment of tension had been cataloged, twisted, and weaponized. He saw email chains between Clarice and a lawyer named Arthur Finch, where she provided anecdotes, distorted memories, and outright lies, all to build this monstrous effigy of him. This wasn't a recent development. The dates on the documents went back nearly a year. For a year, while he had been sanding, carving, and polishing, believing he was building a life, she had been systematically documenting its destruction. He was no longer a husband. He was the opposing party in a lawsuit he never knew had been filed. He needed to see her own words, unvarnished by legal jargon. He backed out of the legal folder and clicked on a chain of emails between Clarice and Alastair Montgomery. The subject line was innocuous: garden party logistics. But the content was a dagger to the heart. The tone was flippant, intimate, and thick with a shared, condescending humor directed squarely at him. "Don't worry," Alastair had written. We'll make sure the luthier is kept in his little shed, playing with his wood shavings. Wouldn't want him scaring off the investors with his authenticity. Henry felt a wave of nausea so intense he had to close his eyes and take a deep, shuddering breath. He forced himself to read Clarice's reply. "You're terrible," she had written, followed by a winking emoji. "But yes, Mother is handling the Henry problem. By the time you arrive, the scene will be perfectly set. No quaint hobbies in sight, I promise." The casual cruelty, the easy betrayal in her words, was more painful than any legal document. This wasn't just about money. This was about contempt. They saw him as a joke, a caricature, an obstacle to be handled. He scrolled down, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He saw them discussing a trip to St. Bart's once the dust settles. He saw Alistair offering to connect her with a more aggressive forensic accounting team. And then he saw the final email from Clarice, sent just last night. "Tomorrow is the big day, the beginning of the end of my starter marriage," she wrote. "I can't wait to finally build a real life with you." The phrase starter marriage hung in the airless office, a final, brutal epitaph for the love he thought they had shared. He was a practice run. He was a stepping stone. He was a temporary arrangement, and his expiration date was today. Henry slowly, deliberately closed the laptop. The quiet click of the lid snapping shut was a sound of absolute finality. It was the sound of a door closing on a life, on a love, on a man he used to be. He stood up from the desk, his movements no longer hesitant or shaky. A profound, almost terrifying calm had settled over him, displacing the hurt, the shock, and the nausea. The cold rage had not dissipated. It had been forged into something else entirely. It was now a tool, as sharp and as purposeful as the finest Japanese chisel in his workshop. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. The face staring back was not that of a heartbroken husband. It was the face of a man who had been pushed past the edge of reason and had found on the other side an unshakable and formidable clarity. They had mistaken his quietness for weakness. They had mistaken his integrity for naivete. They had looked at him and seen a simple craftsman, a man of sawdust and varnish, and had completely overlooked the man his grandmother, a shrewd and powerful woman, had entrusted with a fortune built over generations. They had judged him by their world of surfaces, of appearances, of financial statements. He would now be forced to answer them in the only language they understood. He walked out of the office, his footsteps on the plush carpet now silent and predatory. The distant music of the string quartet no longer sounded like a mockery. It sounded like a prelude. They had written him out of their script, but he was about to write himself back in, not as a supporting character, but as the force that would bring their entire glittering, rotten stage crashing down around them. He did not watch them leave. As the officer's voice, flat and authoritative, instructed Eleanor and a now sobbing Clarice to collect their personal effects and vacate the premises, Henry turned his back. The tableau of their humiliation, the shocked faces of the party guests, the wilting flowers, the abandoned champagne flutes, held no satisfaction for him, only the bitter, metallic taste of necessity. He walked away from the manicured lawn, his work boots making a steady, crunching sound on the crushed gravel of the driveway, a rhythm of grim purpose. Each step was a deliberate severing of a tie, a conscious departure from the man who had patiently endured years of quiet condescension. He walked past his old, reliable pickup truck, the vehicle that had ferried his tools and his lumber, the symbol of the simple craftsman they believed him to be. It looked alien to him now, a relic from another man's life. He pulled out his phone, the same simple, functional device they had always dismissed, and opened an app they would never have suspected he possessed. It was a discreet, iconless application for a bespoke, high-security car service. He typed a single word, "Now," and sent it. Within minutes, a gleaming black sedan, a late-model Audi A8 with windows so heavily tinted they looked like polished obsidian, purred to a silent stop at the end of the drive. A driver in a dark suit stepped out, opened the rear door, and addressed him with a quiet, practiced deference. "Mr. Clark." Henry slid onto the cool black leather of the back seat, the door closing with a heavy, vault-like thud that sealed off the chaos of the garden party completely. As the car pulled away, he allowed himself one last look in the side mirror at the Tudor house. His house, not with sorrow or nostalgia, but with the cold, detached appraisal of a general leaving a secured position to begin the main assault. He wasn't just leaving a home. He was shedding a costume he had worn for a decade, and the man now speeding towards the city was someone Clarice and her mother had never truly met. The journey into Manhattan felt like a decompression chamber, a blank corridor between the life he'd performed and the one he was about to reclaim. Through tinted glass, Queens became a muted film strip, drained of color and urgency. He sank into the leather headrest, breathing air that smelled clean and controlled, nothing like the organic chaos of his workshop or the cloying perfume of the party. The knot in his shoulders, years of anger and grief, didn't melt into relief. It hardened into focus. The accommodating husband fell away like dead skin, replaced by the man he'd kept hidden, shaped by his grandmother's ruthless pragmatism, by the lesson that real power is never loud, and wealth is a weapon used with silence and precision. His phone buzzed non-stop, Clarice's frantic calls and texts, inevitable and irrelevant. He ignored them, opened an encrypted messenger, and sent clipped commands to contacts saved as single initials. Protocol Alpha, initiate, asset shield active, confirming 1600 hours. Replies came back in seconds, one-word confirmations of a plan already in motion. When the car spilled from the Queens Midtown Tunnel into Manhattan's steel and glass canyons, Henry stopped seeing the city like a craftsman passing through. He saw it like a king returning. The car slid to the curb before a bronze and dark glass tower on Park Avenue. He wasn't here for a lawyer. He was here to meet his general. Inside, the lobby rose like a cathedral of corporate authority. Travertine marble, ceilings that swallowed sound, and people moving with quiet purpose in tailored suits. No spectacle, no chatter, only the tectonic kind of power that moved markets. Henry's work clothes, which made him an outcast at home, drew no attention here. In this world, power wasn't the label on your suit. It was the name on the top floor. A man in gray appeared at his side as if summoned. A discreet earpiece. A voice without curiosity. "Mr. Clark, Mr. Finch is expecting you." He didn't ask questions, because there was nothing to confirm. Henry was expected. He was guided into an office suspended above the city. Central Park spread beneath a wall of glass. Arthur Finch didn't rise from behind his massive granite desk. Stone-polished, mountain-heart cold. Late 60s, piercing blue eyes, a face carved with the same permanence. Not just a lawyer, the trustee of his grandmother's estate, the guardian of the Clark fortune. "Henry," Finch said, low and gravelly, "I received your call. I assume the quiet life has finally become untenable." Henry crossed the room and slid a small silver USB drive onto the granite. Clarice's laptop, copied in full. "They hired a forensic accountant," he said flat. "They found the trust. They call it an obstacle. This is their strategy to liquidate me. I want you to dismantle it, and then I want you to burn their world to the ground." Finch picked up the drive, a slow, predatory smile forming. This wasn't a messy divorce. This was war, and Henry had just delivered the enemy's battle plans. The next hour became a masterclass in demolition. Clarice's exit strategy folder glowed on a wall screen while Finch dissected it with surgical detachment. "Amateurs," he scoffed, tapping a clause. "They're claiming dissipation of marital assets based on your workshop expenses, and they missed the obvious. The workshop is a premarital corporate entity. 5 years before you met her. Every tool, every board of lumber. Legitimate business expense for a company she can't touch." Henry listened like a commander taking intelligence. Finch paced before the glass. "Their whole case depends on the image of you as a dependent, low-income craftsman. They'll use your declared income to paint Clarice as the breadwinner. Alimony, property leverage, the usual theater. Then we remove the foundation," Henry said. "Full forensic accounting on our side. Every dollar she's taken from the gallery. Every expense account dinner with Alistair Montgomery. Every undeclared bonus from private sales. I want every secret, financial or otherwise." Finch nodded, something like admiration flashing. "Consider it done. We'll bury them in subpoenas. By the time we're finished, her financial powerhouse story will look like a pathetic fiction." Henry pointed at the screen, Alistair's name. "And him. Shell companies. Disgruntled partners. NDAs. I want enough leverage to ruin him personally and professionally if he so much as breathes in my direction." It wasn't defense anymore. It was a weapon being engineered. His final stop wasn't a bank or court. It was an unmarked brownstone on the East 70s, the Clark Family Foundation, the discreet heart of his real power. Julian Vance met him at the door. 80-something, mind sharp as chess, loyalty like a soldier. In a study that smelled of old leather and beeswax, Henry laid down the last move. Julian, I need the Foundation to act. The Vanderwild Gallery, Clarice is a director. The Foundation is a silent partner in their acquisitions fund. She doesn't know. Julian listened, fingers steepled. Henry continued, voice low. Their valuation is inflated, propped up by a high-profile purchase with questionable provenance, pushed by Clarice and funded in part by Montgomery's firm. Conflict of interest, over-leveraging. I want an emergency audit. Publicly question the valuation and provenance, cite mismanagement and potential shareholder fraud. Julian's cloudy eyes sharpened. He understood instantly. Corporate checkmate, investor panic, reputation shattered. Clarice's judgment dragged into daylight and shredded. Not just to win a divorce, but to erase the world she'd tried to build on the ashes of their marriage. Henry left as the sky bruised purple, cold satisfaction settling in his chest like stone. He had set events in motion that would destroy the woman he once loved, utterly and irrevocably. A week later, the summons arrived. Not from a friendly mailman, but a sleek courier service. Henry was in his workshop, cedar shavings and hot hide glue in the air, when a motorcycle whined outside. He watched a figure in black synthetics dismount, helmet hiding his face, movements insect clean and efficient. The courier didn't go to the main house. He came straight to the carriage house, destination already decided. Henry opened the door before he could knock. A tablet appeared. Sign here. Henry scrawled his name with a finger, a jagged digital imitation of his real hand. The envelope that followed was heavier than it looked, thick paper carrying legal gravity. The embossed logo meant nothing to him. The name didn't. Goldman, Finch, and Adler. Aggressive Manhattan litigation in a single line. He closed the workshop door with the envelope cold in his calloused hands. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what it was. The opening salvo. The formal declaration of war.